The library was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that carried weight. Outside, the streets were filled with the usual city noise, but inside these tall stone walls, silence stretched like an ocean. The only sounds were the turning of pages, the gentle hum of old lamps, and the faint rustle of movement between the shelves. Amara sat at the far corner, her notebook open in front of her. She loved this library not just for the books, but for its atmosphere. It smelled faintly of dust and paper, the air cool against her skin. The long windows let in the last rays of fading daylight, washing the shelves in gold before night took over. This was her sanctuary, her quiet place to escape the world. She was scribbling notes when she heard footsteps. Soft, measured, almost careful, as if the person didn't want to disturb anyone. She glanced up, expecting one of the usual older visitors or maybe the librarian making rounds. Instead, her eyes landed on someone unfamiliar. He was tall, with dark hair that looked slightly untamed, as if he had run his hands through it too many times. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, showing strong forearms. His gaze was scanning the rows of books with focus, but there was something restless in the way he moved, like he was searching for more than just a title. Amara found herself watching a little too long. She quickly lowered her eyes back to her notes, but not before he noticed her. Their gazes brushed for a fleeting second, and in that moment, she felt something stir in her chest. A spark unexpected, uninvited, but impossible to ignore. He moved to the next shelf, and for a while, she thought that would be the end of it. Just another quiet stranger passing through the library? Yet, his steps drew closer, his presence carrying across the silence until she realized he was now standing at the very shelf near her corner. Amara pretended to keep writing, though her pen had stopped. She could feel him there, could almost sense his movements without looking. Finally, curiosity won. She lifted her eyes again. He was running his fingers along the spines of books, his head tilted slightly as he read their titles. Then he pulled one out, an old classic novel, and turned a page or two before noticing her watching. A small, almost mischievous smile curved his lips. "Is this seat taken?" he asked softly, his voice smooth and low, as though he didn't want to disturb the stillness of the library. Amara shook her head, perhaps a bit too quickly. "No, it's free." He nodded, then settled in the chair opposite her. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, each pretending to be lost in their books. But the air between them shifted, charged, alive. Every time she glanced up, she caught him doing the same. Finally, he leaned slightly across the table, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you come here often?" The question was ordinary, yet in the hush of the library, it felt almost intimate. She hesitated, then answered, "Yes. I like the quiet here." He smiled again, a softer smile this time, like he understood. "Same. I think it's the only place left where the world slows down." Their voices were so low they were almost like secrets. And secrets had a way of drawing people closer. Amara found herself studying him now, the thoughtful lines of his face, the way his eyes lingered when she spoke. She felt warmth rising inside her, though the air remained cool. Something about his presence unsettled her calm, but in a way that felt thrilling. They exchanged a few more quiet words, nothing heavy, just little pieces of themselves. Favorite books? Why they liked the library? The kind of small talk that usually faded quickly, but here, it carried a strange weight. Every answer seemed to matter. Eventually, the old clock in the hallway chimed. The sound reminded her how late it was getting. She glanced at her notebook, realizing she had written almost nothing. He must have noticed too, because he gave her another small smile, this one playful. "Looks like I distracted you," he murmured. Amara felt a nervous laugh escape her lips. "Maybe just a little." He closed his book and stood, sliding it back into its place on the shelf. Before leaving, he looked at her once more. "I'll probably be back tomorrow. Maybe I'll see you then." And just like that, he walked away, his footsteps fading into the quiet halls. Amara sat frozen, her heart beating faster than it should have. She didn't even know his name, yet the memory of his voice lingered like a whisper in her mind. The library felt different now. No longer just a sanctuary, but the beginning of something unknown. Something that made her look forward to tomorrow with a flutter she couldn't quite explain. The next evening, Amara found herself returning to the library earlier than usual. She told herself it was just routine, that she always came at this hour to study, but deep down she knew the truth. She wanted to see if he would return, just as he had said. The library looked the same, rows of books stretching like endless paths, tall windows letting in the last hints of sunset, but to her, everything carried a different edge now. Every footstep echoed with possibility. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. She chose her usual table in the corner, though her heart wasn't in her notes. Her ears strained for the sound of those familiar footsteps. Minutes passed. Then, just as doubt began to creep in, she heard it, the careful rhythm of shoes against the polished floor. She looked up, and there he was, as if the evening had been waiting for him all along. He carried no hurry, no hesitation. His eyes scanned the room, and when they met hers, the smallest smile tugged at his lips. It was the kind of smile that felt private, as though meant only for her. Without asking, he crossed the space and slid into the chair opposite hers, as though the spot had been reserved for him. He placed a book on the table, but his gaze didn't linger on its pages. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his attention drifting between her face and the quiet room around them. "You're here again," he whispered, his tone carrying both amusement and certainty. "I told you I come here often," Amara replied, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed the flutter in her chest. He tilted his head, studying her for a moment. "Do you always sit in this corner?" She nodded, a small smile breaking through. "It's quiet here. Fewer people come this way." "Then it's perfect," he said softly, almost to himself. His words seemed simple, yet in the stillness of the library, they carried a weight that made her pulse quicken. For a while, they let silence stretch between them. She scribbled notes she would never read later, while he turned the pages of his book with slow precision. Yet the silence wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken questions, unspoken thoughts, and the awareness that something was quietly blooming between them. At one point, their hands moved at the same time, reaching for the pencil that had rolled to the edge of the table. Their fingers brushed just the briefest contact, yet enough to send a spark up Amara's arm. She quickly pulled back, her cheeks warming, but he only smiled, as though he had felt it too. "Sorry," she whispered. "No need," he replied, his voice low and even. "I didn't mind." The air grew heavier after that, charged in a way that made the quiet seem almost alive. Every small movement felt magnified, the slide of his hand across the table, the curve of her lips when she tried to hide a smile, the way their eyes kept meeting as if drawn by some unseen force. Eventually, he closed his book, leaning forward slightly. His voice dropped lower, meant only for her ears. "You never told me your name." "Amara," she said, almost too softly. "And you?" "Julian," he answered. The name seemed to settle between them like a secret gift. They lingered in that exchange, savoring the intimacy of simply knowing each other's names. It was a small step, but it felt like the opening of a door they both wanted to walk through. After a pause, Julian's gaze drifted toward the deeper shelves of the library, where fewer lights glowed and fewer footsteps echoed. "There's a corner back there," he whispered. "Quiet. Hidden. Have you seen it?" Amara shook her head. No. His eyes met hers again, steady and inviting. "Come. I'll show you." She hesitated, her heart thudding. Yet curiosity, and something more, pulled her to her feet. She followed him past the rows of books, deeper into the library's shadowed aisles. The further they went, the quieter it became, until the rest of the world felt far away. Finally, they stopped at a narrow alcove tucked between two tall shelves. It was dim, with only a faint lamp glowing above, and a small bench pressed against the wall. It felt like a secret place, unseen by most. Julian turned to her, his expression unreadable but intense. "This is where I come when I don't want to be found," he whispered. Amara looked around, her breath catching. The space felt private, almost forbidden, as if they were standing inside a secret only they shared now. The silence between them thickened, filled with something that had no words. Neither spoke for a long moment. Their eyes locked, and in that quiet alcove, the rest of the library faded. Only the two of them remained caught in a secret corner, where whispers could become anything. The alcove seemed to breathe around them, quiet and still, as if the library itself was holding its breath. Amara sat on the bench while Julian leaned lightly against the shelf, his arms folded, his gaze steady. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them carried a rhythm, like a song only they could hear. Finally, Julian broke it. "Pick a book," he said softly, gesturing to the shelf beside him. "Something you like." Amara hesitated, then stood and let her fingers brush along the spines of the books. She wasn't even reading the titles at first. Her attention was too focused on the closeness of him, the way she could sense his presence without looking. At last, she pulled a volume free. Its cover was faded, the pages yellowed, but she held it like a treasure. "What is it?" Julian asked, leaning closer. She smiled faintly. "A collection of poems." "Perfect," he murmured, taking the book gently from her hands. His fingers lingered against hers, just enough to make her breath catch. Then he sat beside her on the bench, their shoulders almost touching. He opened the book, the old paper rustling softly. "Read one," Amara whispered, her voice lower than she intended. Julian's eyes flickered to hers before he looked down at the page. His voice was quiet, deep, carrying a softness that made every word feel alive. The lines of poetry filled the alcove, echoing like whispers that belonged only to them. Amara listened, her heart drumming faster with each verse, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way he said them, as though each line was meant for her alone. When he finished, he didn't close the book. Instead, he tilted it slightly toward her. "Your turn." She hesitated, but his steady gaze gave her courage. Taking the book, she read the next piece, her voice softer than his, uncertain at first. But as she continued, she felt his eyes on her, not judging, not rushing, just listening, completely present. That attention wrapped around her like warmth, and suddenly the words came easier. When she finished, a silence fell. Neither of them looked at the book anymore. Their eyes found each other, and for a moment, it was as if the entire library had disappeared. Just them, the dim light, and the weight of something growing between them. Julian slowly closed the book, his hand brushing against hers again. The touch lingered longer this time. Neither pulled away. Instead, their fingers rested together over the cover, light at first, then firmer, as though testing the meaning of such a small connection. "It's strange," Amara whispered. "I've been here so many times, but tonight it feels different." Julian's voice was low, almost a murmur. "Because you're not alone this time." Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something warmer, deeper. She wanted to look away, to hide from the intensity in his gaze, but she couldn't. She was caught, and she didn't want to escape. Their joined hands shifted, fingers entwining slowly, naturally, as if they had always been meant to fit together. The contact was simple, innocent even, but the effect rippled through her like fire beneath her skin. She wondered if he felt it too. One look at his expression told her he did. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The sound of the library beyond their alcove seemed far away. Every beat of her heart felt louder than the turning of pages, louder than the hum of the lamps. She wanted to hold on to this moment, stretch it until it became endless. Julian leaned slightly closer, his shoulder brushing hers now. "It's almost dangerous, isn't it?" he whispered. "How quiet it is here. How easy it is to lose track of everything else." Amara swallowed, her lips parting. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." His hand tightened gently around hers, and the small smile on his lips deepened, though his eyes stayed serious. "No. Maybe it's not." The spell broke only when footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere in the library. They both glanced toward the sound, and instinctively, Julian slid the book back into place on the shelf. Amara straightened, though their hands reluctantly parted. When the footsteps faded again, silence returned, heavier now, filled with the memory of touch. Julian rose to his feet, but his gaze lingered on her. "Same time tomorrow," he whispered. Amara nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "Tomorrow." He gave her one last look before slipping away, leaving her alone in the alcove. She pressed her hand to her lap, still feeling the heat of his touch. The library had always been her refuge, her safe place, but now, it had become something else. A place where her heart beat faster, where a whisper felt like a promise, where every page turned might reveal something more. The next evening, Amara arrived earlier than usual. The library was still settling into its night rhythm, the windows holding the last streaks of orange light. She sat at her usual table, her notebook open, though her pen barely moved. Every tick of the old wall clock felt heavier. She wasn't here for notes or study. She was here for him. When Julian appeared, it was almost as if the air itself shifted. His steps were quiet, but she noticed them instantly, her heart lifting before she even looked up. He found her in the corner, his lips curving in that now familiar smile, one that seemed reserved only for her. "You beat me here," he whispered as he slid into the chair across from her. "I couldn't concentrate at home," Amara admitted softly, her cheeks warming at the honesty of her words. "I thought, maybe it would be easier here." Julian's gaze softened, his eyes steady on hers. "I'm glad you came early. I was hoping we'd have more time." That simple statement lingered between them like a secret. Neither said more for a while, letting the silence of the library settle around them. But soon, Julian leaned closer, lowering his voice even further. "Do you want to go back to the corner?" Amara hesitated only a moment before nodding. Together, they slipped quietly through the rows of books until they reached the hidden alcove. The soft lamp above them cast a golden glow over the shelves, wrapping the space in a kind of secret warmth. Once there, Amara sat on the bench, and Julian joined her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. For a time, they opened a book together, flipping through pages neither of them truly read. Their attention wasn't on the words but on each other, on the nearness that made the silence between them feel alive. Julian finally set the book aside, his hands clasping together as though he was holding back something. His voice was low, careful. "Can I tell you something?" Amara turned to him, her heart already racing. "Of course." He drew in a breath, his eyes fixed on the floor for a moment before meeting hers again. "I've been coming to this library for months. Sometimes I'd sit in different corners, just to be alone. But lately, I started hoping for something different. That maybe, one day, I'd find someone. Someone who understood the quiet the way I do." Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected him to share something so personal, so quietly vulnerable. "And then you saw me," she whispered. Julian nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes. And now it feels like I don't want to sit in silence unless you're there." The words sank deep, stirring something in Amara that she hadn't realized she had been yearning for. She had always loved the quiet of the library because it gave her peace, but with him, silence became something else, something alive, something she wanted to keep. Her voice was barely a breath. "I feel the same. I don't know why, but I've been waiting for you without even knowing it." Julian's hand shifted then, moving closer on the bench until it found hers. Their fingers intertwined, and this time, neither hesitated. The warmth of his touch seemed to ground them both, binding them to the moment. Amara's pulse quickened, her words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I'm not usually like this. I don't open up easily. But around you, I can't help it." He squeezed her hand gently. "That's not a weakness, Amara. That's trust. And I don't take it lightly." The confession hung between them, fragile and powerful at once. Amara searched his eyes, finding no hesitation there, only honesty. She felt exposed, but not unsafe. Instead, she felt seen, as though he understood parts of her no one else had ever noticed. The library around them was silent, but inside that alcove, the air was full of unspoken promises. Amara leaned a little closer, not daring more, but needing the space between them to shrink. Julian mirrored the movement, their shoulders pressing fully together now. His voice was a whisper so low she almost didn't catch it. "You've made this place different for me. Better. I don't think I can go back to how it was before." Her breath trembled, a smile tugging at her lips despite the rush in her chest. "Then don't. Stay with me. Here. Tomorrow. And the day after." Julian's smile matched hers, quiet but deep. "I'll be here. As long as you are." For a long while, they sat together in that corner, their hands joined, their hearts beating in rhythm with the hush of the library. Nothing grand happened, no dramatic declarations, yet the weight of what they had shared was enough to change everything. It was not just a meeting of chance anymore. It was a choice. A confession carried not by words alone, but by the steady warmth of their touch. The next evening, the library felt different the moment Amara stepped inside. A storm had begun outside, rain hammering against the windows, wind rattling the glass. The streets were nearly empty, the city muted beneath the storm's roar. Inside, the library's usual calm seemed more pronounced, the lamps casting golden pools of light that shimmered in the reflections of the rain. Amara moved quickly to her usual table, hoping Julian had arrived. He was already there, standing near the entrance, holding a stack of books, his dark hair slightly damp from the rain. Their eyes met, and both smiled a small, private acknowledgement in the midst of the storm. "Looks like the weather has other plans tonight," Julian said, setting the books down. "We might be here longer than usual." She laughed softly, a little nervously. "I don't mind." He returned the smile and gestured toward the hidden alcove. "Then shall we?" They slipped through the aisles together, the familiar path now lit with the intimacy of their shared secret. The alcove seemed warmer tonight, the storm outside heightening the sense of seclusion. As they sat together on the bench, Julian opened one of the books he had brought, but neither really read. Their attention was entirely on each other, the quiet hum of rain creating a rhythm around them. Hours passed, the storm intensifying. Thunder rolled in the distance, shaking the tall windows, and lightning briefly illuminated the alcove. Amara shivered, pulling her cardigan closer around her shoulders. Julian noticed immediately. "You're cold," he said softly, slipping his arm around her shoulders in a protective, gentle gesture. The closeness startled her, but not unpleasantly. Heat spread through her chest, the electricity between them tangible, a quiet tension that neither wanted to break. "I didn't expect it to get this bad," she admitted, leaning slightly against him. "Neither did I," he murmured, his lips close enough to brush the top of her hair. "Looks like we're stuck here together for a while." The words made her heart flutter. Stuck together. Alone. No interruptions, no distractions. Just the two of them, the storm outside, and the hidden alcove that had become their private world. They talked quietly, sharing stories about their lives outside the library, laughing softly when the thunder rolled too close. Julian's voice was low and soothing, a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm. He reached over to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and Amara felt a thrill at the gentle intimacy of the gesture. At one point, a loud crack of thunder made them both jump, and Julian instinctively pulled her closer. Their foreheads brushed, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. "You're warm," Amara whispered, more to herself than to him. "And you make me warmer," Julian replied, his voice soft, intimate. The words hung in the air, unspoken yet understood. Their hands found each other again, fingers entwining naturally, the storm outside making the library feel like a world apart. Minutes turned into hours. Eventually, the librarian's voice echoed through the halls, faint but insistent. "The library will be closing soon." Julian looked toward the sound, then back at Amara. "I guess, we can't stay hidden forever." She sighed, a mixture of disappointment and contentment. "I wish we could." "Me too," he murmured, his hand squeezing hers. "But maybe the storm brought us here for a reason. To finally be, like this." Her heart raced at the implication, at the closeness, at the intimacy of sharing this quiet, stolen time with him. She leaned her head against his shoulder, letting the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat soothe her nerves. The storm raged on outside, but in the alcove, the world felt still. Every brush of fingers, every quiet glance, every whispered word became more than just a connection, it became a promise. Even as the librarian's footsteps echoed closer, signaling the end of the night, neither of them wanted to leave. And as they finally rose, hands still entwined, Amara realized something she hadn't before. The library was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a place of beginnings. A place where whispers became trust, and trust became something more, something that might last long after the storm passed. The next day, the library felt unusually alive to Amara. The sun streamed through the tall windows, painting the shelves in gold, but her attention wasn't on the light or the books. It was on him, Julian, waiting near the entrance with that calm, magnetic presence that had already started to occupy her thoughts completely. He noticed her the moment she entered, his eyes lighting up in that familiar way. "You came," he whispered as she approached. His voice carried the same low, intimate tone that made the corners of her mind tingle. "I wouldn't miss it," Amara replied, her own voice soft, yet charged with a nervous energy she hadn't felt before. Together, they moved toward their hidden corner, slipping past the rows of books like they had done so many times before. But today, the air between them was different, thicker, warmer, heavier with anticipation. The storm from the night before was gone, but something about the quiet of the library amplified every heartbeat, every glance. They settled on the bench, sitting closer than usual, shoulders brushing, hands naturally finding each other. Julian opened a book, but their attention strayed almost immediately. Words on pages became background noise to the electricity in the small space between them. Amara tried to read, but her gaze kept drifting toward him. The light caught the curve of his jaw, the way his hair fell slightly over his forehead, the intensity of his eyes when they met hers. Every small detail made her pulse quicken. Julian noticed. He shifted slightly, leaning toward her just enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. His hand brushed hers over the book, fingers intertwining with hers once more. The contact was simple, but the effect was not. It sent a thrill through her chest, a quiet, burning desire she could no longer ignore. "You feel different today," she whispered, barely audible. "And you," he replied, his voice low, intimate, carrying a weight that made her heart race. "You feel impossible to ignore." Amara's breath caught. The words were unspoken confessions, acknowledgments of what had been building quietly between them for days. She could no longer pretend this was just friendship or curiosity. There was something more, something urgent, powerful, and undeniable. Julian shifted closer, his knee brushing hers, their bodies leaning toward one another as naturally as the pages of a book falling open. The space between their faces was so small now that she could feel his breath, warm and steady, brushing against her cheek. Her pulse thundered in her ears, loud enough that she was sure he could hear it. "You're so close," she murmured, her lips trembling with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. "And you," he whispered back, "are everything I didn't know I was waiting for." The words hovered between them, heavy and charged. Amara's hand found its way to his arm, feeling the warmth beneath his shirt. Julian responded instinctively, his hand moving to rest over hers, fingers entwining. Neither of them pulled away. The touch was gentle, deliberate, electric. A quiet laugh escaped her lips, soft but breathless. "We're being reckless." Julian's eyes glimmered with amusement and intensity. "Maybe," he said, "but some things are worth the risk." The library around them seemed to fade. Rows of books, polished floors, and glowing lamps disappeared into the background. There was only the quiet alcove, only the two of them, and the building tension that had been growing since the very first meeting. Their foreheads brushed together as they leaned closer, a subtle closeness that spoke volumes. The heat of their shared presence was almost unbearable. Every whisper, every heartbeat, every brush of fingers was a promise, a silent acknowledgement of what had been left unspoken for too long. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself be consumed by the warmth, the intimacy, the undeniable pull between them. Julian's hand tightened slightly over hers, a silent confirmation that he felt the same. The library had always been her sanctuary, but tonight it had become something more, a place where whispers burned with meaning, where a quiet corner could hold a world of desire, and where two hearts had found each other without words. For the first time, Amara realized that what had begun as curiosity, as chance encounters and stolen glances, had grown into something undeniable. Something real. Something that neither of them could or wanted to escape. And in that hidden alcove, with hands entwined and hearts racing, the whisper between them burned hotter than any words could ever convey. The library had never felt more alive than it did that evening. The quiet halls, once simply a refuge for Amara, now seemed charged with possibility. Every shadow, every glowing lamp, every row of books carried the memory of whispered words, of fingers brushing, of the closeness they had shared in their secret alcove. Amara arrived first, as usual, her heartbeat fluttering with anticipation. She clutched her notebook, though it had long ceased to matter. It wasn't notes she was seeking tonight, it was him. Julian appeared moments later, as if drawn by some invisible thread. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, eyes glimmering with the same quiet intensity she had grown to recognize. When their gazes met, they shared the small, private smile that had become their unspoken greeting, full of promise. "Evening," Julian whispered, his voice low and intimate. "I've been looking forward to this all day." "So have I," Amara replied, her voice soft, yet carrying a tremor of excitement. They moved together to the alcove, slipping past the rows of books as if they were the only two people in the world. The golden lamp above them cast a warm glow over the familiar bench, highlighting the small, intimate space that had witnessed the growth of their connection. Tonight felt different, though. The storm had passed, and the world outside was calm, but inside, something had shifted. The quiet tension that had lingered for days now felt ready to bloom into something more tangible. They settled on the bench, shoulders brushing, hands finding each other without hesitation. Julian opened a book, but they both knew it was merely a prop, a familiar ritual to give them comfort as they leaned closer together. Their gazes locked, breaths mingling, and the world outside their corner ceased to exist. Amara's fingers traced the lines of his hand, feeling the warmth and strength beneath. Julian's thumb brushed softly over hers, a gentle promise, a silent question. She leaned slightly into him, resting her head against his shoulder. His arm wrapped around her naturally, protective, familiar, intimate. "You know," Julian whispered, "I never thought a library could feel like this. Like, it could hold more than books. Like it could hold a beginning." Amara tilted her head, smiling. "A beginning, yes. And maybe more than that. A place where whispers lead to something real." He chuckled softly, low and warm. "Exactly. I never expected to find this, with you." Her heart beat faster. "I didn't either. But I'm glad I did." For a long moment, they simply sat together, savoring the closeness. There was no need to speak. Every touch, every glance, every quiet breath carried the weight of their feelings. The library, once just a sanctuary, had become the backdrop to a story neither of them had planned but both wanted to continue. Julian tilted his head, his lips brushing the top of her hair. "Amara," he murmured, almost hesitantly. "I don't want this to stay hidden here. I want more. With you. Outside this corner, outside these walls. Her breath caught. She had hoped he would say it, longed for it, but hearing it made her chest ache in the best way. I want that too, she whispered. More. Not just here. Not just this, but everything beyond. A quiet smile spread across his face, and he brushed a gentle hand across hers. Then let's start. No more whispers. No more waiting. Just us. Amara felt a warmth spreading through her, the kind that made her feel safe and alive at the same time. She leaned forward slightly, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling. The connection they had built over stolen moments, subtle touches, and whispered confessions now felt ready to take shape in the world beyond the library. They lingered in that position, savoring the closeness, until the lamps above flickered slightly, signaling the approaching evening. The library, silent and patient, had watched their story unfold. And now it seemed to nod in approval, as if acknowledging that their time here had prepared them for what came next. Finally, Julian stood, offering Amara his hand. She took it without hesitation, letting him guide her toward the exit. As they stepped out of the quiet alcove and into the broader world, the night air was cool, refreshing, and filled with possibility. The city lights glimmered, and the streets were alive, but Amara felt no fear. With Julian by her side, holding her hand, the world seemed full of promise. The library had been the beginning, the place where whispers became more, and now, beyond its walls, their story was ready to continue unfolding with every step they took together. And in that moment, Amara realized that some beginnings were meant to grow, to escape the confines of quiet corners and hidden alcoves. Some whispers were meant to become voices, carrying feelings that could no longer remain unseen. And some connections were meant to last.